and welcome to today's Killen Report. We've got an exciting program for you. We're going to be discussing energy and nuclear energy and renewables and all kinds of things, and I can't wait to get into this. I'm Jonathan Kleid, owner of the Kleid Design Group Fine Custom Cabinetry in Oakland, California, and I've got two very, very distinguished guests I'm delighted to welcome to the program, Dr. Alex Cannara and Dr. Ripudamon Malhorta. It is a pleasure, gentlemen, to have you. Let me just give our audience a little bit of background. Alex is a nuclear energy and ocean change activist with degrees from Lehigh University and advanced degrees, including his doctorate from Stanford University in mathematical systems. And he's worked with a lot of local and national organizations on energy and climate issues and pertaining to clean and safe nuclear power. And that's your background. And Ripu, you received your Ph.D. in chemistry from the University of Southern California. Great. And you're the author of 5 books now, I believe, and over 100 articles in scientific journals. And more recently, you were the Associate Director of Chemical Sciences and Technology Laboratory at SRI International in Menlo Park. And you also won the 2015 Henry H. Storch Award. And you won that because of your contributions to the field of fuel science and energy technology. So, gentlemen, welcome to today's program. Pleasure to have you. Let's just dive in, shall we? Ripu, can greater energy efficiency and conservation measures allow us to meet global demand for energy without increasing consumption over current levels? What's your thought?
Short answer, no.
Longer answer?
Longer answer, yes. You know, this is often talked about as if it helps. I mean, efficiency and conservation are important aspects, and we have to exercise all those measures. But I don't see, when I look at more than half the world's population living at the level they are, and the need to move towards all electric systems, because they are the cleaner ones, the amount of electrical energy that we need is so large, it'll be about 4 times the current production levels that we have. So I don't see efficiency and conservation alone helping us with that. Mm-hmm. They could be an important part, but we will have to increase our overall supply many times, many-fold, over our current levels. And our current levels are unsustainable, as you know.
I do understand that. So talk to me just very briefly about renewables.
So renewables, what people generally understand with that are there's the hydroelectric, there's the geothermal, but mostly people think about wind and solar. And these are the ones that are rapidly increasing, yes, and the prices have come down dramatically, yes. But these last two are also intermittent sources. And we would rather have our systems be available all the time. We can't have, or we have to spend a lot more money in managing these fluctuations and these long periods when they may not be around.
I understand. So it's for the person not in the industry, I suppose it's easy to appreciate the positive attributes of renewables.
Yeah.
What about nuclear?
I think it's a wonderful source of energy for us, and it holds one of the best potential going forward. I know it has we have a terrible and a big uphill battle in terms of convincing people to realize that this is a safe and effective and cheap source of energy. It's not going to go away, and it's clean, and it's environmentally one of the most benign ones that's around. Mm-hmm. It's also the safest. But if you look at when all these benefits start from one little thing, which is the energy density. Mm-hmm. We have to remember that.
And maybe, you know, as an example, you always carry something with you, don't you, Alex, for energy density?
I shouldn't have told him.
Maybe you
Shouldn't have told him.
can show us what that means.
Yeah, this is a slug of, it could be a slug of pure uranium.
It could be, or it is.
Well, depends on who's watching.
Understand. It could be then.
So that slug of uranium is enough to drive all the energy needs that you have, or I have, or Ripu has, for a decade. House heating, flying across the world, driving automobiles, all that kind of thing, running your iPhone. And I guess you need to buy more iPhones now, given Apple stock is having some problems. So this amount of uranium is enough to supply an OECD person's needs for energy for a decade. And when those atoms are split, like Einstein explained to President Roosevelt, we got two atoms. And atoms are all the same size, as Avogadro, the famous scientist, explained. So we have two of those to find a place to put as waste every 10 years for each person. Not a very big deal, right? So that's part of the problem with nuclear, is simply that it's an emotional reaction that people have been trained to have by media and you know, anti-nuclear forces in the social.
But from a
milieu.
scientific point of view, you're
It's
all
fine.
both confident that nuclear is absolutely, from your point of view, a very safe, fine form of energy that can be disposed in a way that
we have more radioactive material in coal ash around the various coal plants in the southeast of the United States than we have to worry about from a nuclear plant. And the other thing to really get through is that nuclear plants don't have bomb materials in them. They're explicitly required by the Nuclear Regulatory Commission and by the International Atomic Energy Agency to have materials in them that are so dilute you could not be making a bomb with them. So this uranium is pure, but when you put it into a nuclear plant, you put in 20 times more of a material that can't fission, can't be made into a weapon. So that part of the nuclear plant's fueling is 95% of what's in the plant, and it's 95% of what comes out of the plant every 5 years or so when they're refueling it. And that part of it, at 95%, is perfectly reusable. The French have done this for years.
So PG&E is getting a lot of bad press on a number of fronts, from the fires to the nuclear plants, and now it plans to shut down these really important sources, the Diablo nuclear power plant.
It's a very foolish thing to do.
What are your thoughts on all of this?
Well, I mean, it's the dominant source of clean energy from PG&E is the Diablo Canyon nuclear plant, which produces more clean energy than any other source in California.
That's true.
And it's been running that way since 1986, and it runs 90% of every year, at least. And it can even be called upon by our ISO, our controller for electric energy distribution in California. It can be called upon to run longer than it was scheduled to run.
Right.
In 2015, it was called upon to not refuel, but to run for a month or so longer in order to meet the state need for a heat wave in air conditioning, particularly in the southern part of the state.
So when people have a fear of this, and they cite Chernobyl, or they cite Japan, or they cite talk about how to assuage this and persuade the general public that we're safe.
It is very hard. I've had that experience many times. I do try to bring back the facts, and maybe I should use some of the other skills of persuasion, because I've always gone by the logic, and I know that logic doesn't always work. But logically looking at it, if you look at say deaths per unit of energy produced, nuclear has the least, has the fewest. If I look at the materials that are needed, it's the fewest. If I look at, when people bring up 3 Mile Island, you remind them, nobody died from it, okay? Its next big disaster was the Chernobyl. First of all, it was not really a commercial power plant like the way we are built that was without containment and all that. And yes, it was a terrible disaster. And it was happened during an unscheduled kind of an experiment that was, they were trying to do, things went awry and all that. But still, what has been the, after all these years, what have we learned? Where are all those thousands of deaths that they were talking about? No, we can't detect them. There aren't that many deaths that happened from there. There were some, about 50 people died immediately from the acute radiation that they were exposed to when they went into work on the.
What about over time?
Over time, we haven't seen any of those. Actually, the area that was evacuated, and now, well, the wild animals and all have come, and they're living. Mm-hmm. I'm sure if you search for them, you'll find reports about two-headed frogs or some strange things, but I have not seen any scientific peer-reviewed article or a report that shows any of those things. In fact, earlier, using the linear no threshold theory, which is a flawed assumption that's made often, but it's okay to use that if you want to look at the upper limit. What's the worst scenario? You can get the worst scenario from that. Even in that, we were thinking about a few thousand deaths, premature cancers from the Chernobyl thing, from all the exposures. In a population there, because cancer is such a prevalent thing, about 20%, that it's undetectable unless you're looking for things. Mm-hmm. Fukushima is the other one. Nobody died from the radiation. People died from the tsunami, and people died from the mental stress of having been forcibly evacuated from that area, and the worries about being able to get back, or the social stigma of having been exposed. But a lot of it is fears about radiation, and they're there. Mm-hmm. And because we don't see it or something, it has that. It evokes that fear, which is very hard to get over. I don't want to poo-poo it entirely. Mm-hmm. I mean, I recognize people have that fear. Right. But how do I tell them, look at it, nobody died from it.
Right. So on a more local level, Alex, why does the utility PG&E want to shut this plant down?
Yes, well, California is unusual. In some respects, it's dysfunctional, and as far as utilities are concerned, because utilities don't make very much money from what we pay them for their electric rates and about our electricity use. What they make money from in California is that the California Public Utilities Commission lets them bill us based upon what's called capital cost recovery. And what CCR says is that if you own a utility, you're better off building new things, plants, transmission lines, whatever, and charging your customers not only for the capital invested in those new things, but you're allowed to get over 10% interest on them from us, the utility customers. So when you have a plant that's been running, like the Diablo Canyon plant, since 1986, it's depreciated pretty much to zero on the books of PG&E. So they don't really have anything to charge us for, capital-wise, unless they go out and invest in something else. And that's fundamentally the background in California for why utilities do what they do. We actually have more power plants in California than we need because of this capital cost recovery craziness that lets them get 10% on investments that they're going to get 110% back from us on. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. The Los Angeles Times, I think, had an article on this some months ago about California having too many power plants. Mm. So they don't care, they meaning the utility company, doesn't necessarily care to do anything that is beyond what they're legally required to do. Right.
So you'd mentioned the PUC
Yeah.
in all of this. So what's their thinking?
That's
with
the
regard
problem.
to
The problem is that the PUC has always been populated by gubernatorial appointments that are related to the power industry. So like when we had that terrible tragedy in San Bruno when 8 people were killed by being burned to death in their own homes because of a major gas line that wasn't maintained properly, the National Transportation Safety Board found PG&E and the CPUC negligent. But the CPUC head wasn't kicked out. Nobody on the CPUC lost their position, even though for 20 or 30 years, documents had been falsified, tests that were supposed to be done on the gas lines hadn't been done, or weren't reported properly, all this kind of thing. Just basic, simple collusion amongst the regulator and the regulated. Mm-hmm. And the governor did nothing about it.
Interesting. I want to go back to the first question that I asked you, which you gave me a resounding no. Usually I like my first question with a yes. So let me try it another way. Solar and wind.
Yeah.
Right. It's now often cheaper than coal.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And battery costs are coming down.
Yeah.
So why can't renewables and those resources supply all the energy that we need?
So you have to think about what does it take to get those energy. I think we were talking about energy density a little bit. Right. And I wanted to show you the materials requirements for installing a system to harness these wind and solar or something like that is so much more. You begin to strain the supplies of basic raw materials like like steel and concrete and copper, aluminum, glass. These are the things that our global supplies have to be increased many, many, many times. And on top of that, if we are going to be turning into an all, relying everything, including our transportation, which is more than about 40% of our primary energy consumption comes from transportation. If we want to make that also electric, we need a lot more electricity, and the growth that we are looking at, as fast as it is, it pales compared to where we really need to go. You just have to draw it on, look at the scales. It's hundreds of times that the current levels are. And I think we have, at the moment, the costs when they're coming down is because they're not including the costs that are associated for managing the variability. Mm-hmm. That is not included. Right. So what's going to be put in to be able to have the power on when the sun isn't there or something? So either you triple the amount or of capacity to begin with and have all of them producing and save 2 of them for the 16 hours that you may not, when sun is not optimal or not there. Mm-hmm. Things like that. Those costs are not exactly being borne at the moment. Mm-hmm. And when you start looking at those, it gets very, very expensive.
So there are problems in terms of the production and the energy density of renewables. They're closing power plants. That's not so good. No. So in the bit of remaining time that we've got, tell me, what are you guys optimistic about in all of this stuff?
Okay, so that's pretty straightforward. So we're optimistic about educating the average person, because if the average person is educated, they can't be fooled by the wind and solar people, for instance. As Ripu said, even the owner of Berkshire Hathaway, who has invested in wind, said that without the subsidy, they wouldn't do it because it doesn't make any sense. So the wind industry, in fact, is making money off everyone because everyone subsidizes the few that are involved in the industry. And if that subsidy went away, there wouldn't be any reason to install the windmills. Same for the solar PV systems. Solar is even more special because it's not a completed engineering project. It's not really a finished product. It wastes 80% of the sunlight. So you wouldn't buy a car that wastes 80% of the gasoline you put in it.
Right.
But solar panels waste 80% of the sunlight that falls on them as heat, plain old heat. But we're supposed to be against global warming. So why would we want to install something that's going to take 80% of the sunlight falling on a given square mile and convert it into heat? So there's this belief, unfortunately, that's been propagated into the average person's thinking that somehow wind and solar are, even though they're low energy density, they're able to supplant constant energy sources like coal, oil, nuclear, hydro, and so forth. So what we have to do is educate people to think about, well, what are we really trying to do? We're trying to eliminate combustion and the effluents of combustion, CO2 and other things. And we want to have a utility quality source of energy. And that's what we expect, because before all this business about global warming and renewables, we had utilities. We had 24/7 power. We had 24/7 water. We had 24/7 police, fire, sewer. Somehow, electricity now, because of this existence of a solar panel or a windmill, now somehow people are being convinced that, well, now we can deal with these variable sources, which are very expensive, as Ripo was pointing out, to back up. California has so much solar energy at noontime that we pay other states to take it. It's negative pricing. We still subsidize the solar installer, but we charge our citizens not only for the subsidy, but to pay Utah or Nevada to take the solar
I don't know how
excess.
optimistic we should be. How about you? What do you?
So,
give me briefly what you're.
There are a few things.
It's ridiculous.
For me, the optimism comes from the fact that I can understand the skewed market in the U.S. and in particular California doesn't allow this, but elsewhere, it's not stopping. I'm encouraged by the fact that China and India and Korea are building. Korea is building nuclear power plants at a very cost-effective manner, and their prices are really down. And I mean, that's because they're building, and so the prices are coming down. There are many newer technologies that are walk-away safe. That gives me hope. Right now, what we can do is, in California, first of all, is something that you may have heard before. Someone described, if you find yourself in a hole, the first thing you do is you stop digging. We are really short of clean energy, and we are, closing Diablo Canyon is something like digging deeper into the hole. 18 terawatt hours of good clean energy out of the what we need, and we have closed San Onofre. We need to start a few simple actions that we can take is, first of all, give nuclear the same kinds of subsidies or credit for producing clean CO2-free energy that wind and solar get. It'll make them more competitive. Number two, start building, reopen these plants and start building some. We'll learn from them, we'll experience, and with the experience, the prices will come down. And three, do some R&D in the more advanced ones and see that they can happen. That's what gives me the optimism.
Well, I'll tell you what gives me optimism is the fact that beginning on February 16th, Art Ventures Gallery in Menlo Park is going to be having a series featuring paintings by our friend Michael Killen and various speakers. And it's come to our attention that both of you, probably at separate times, will be having the opportunity to educate some members of the public who we hope will come and see you with this message. That's an optimistic thing. That at least makes me feel kind of good about it.
Thank you so much. And thank you, Michael.
The other part of this to be optimistic about is that it's becoming clear that we risk national security by not implementing.
I think the Pentagon said that was one of the very
That's true.
first thing. The energy, or lack of it, is really a national
And
security issue.
international economic viability. Because if I had a international marketing manager from China's largest nuclear power plant constructor lean over to me at dinner a couple of years ago and say, we intend to dominate world nuclear power.
Again, I want to end on an optimistic note, but
Yeah,
that's
well,
that's
that's what
okay.
we know that.
For the world, it means.
For the world.
So
We can do it.
and one of the other things that's coming up that's going to be great, also featuring some of artwork of Michael Killen,
Yeah.
is the Silicon Valley Energy Summit
Yeah.
on June 21st.
Yeah.
Which is a big deal. Do you guys go to that? Is that something?
Sometimes he
I
goes
go there.
regularly. I have occasionally gone.
Yeah, and so I'm sure there are a lot of great minds, obviously, and a lot of wonderful things that are being bandied around and talked about. And this, obviously, these ideas will ferment and hopefully come, to fruition. It's always a pleasure to have such wonderful guests and have the opportunity to be able to speak with wonderful people like yourselves that are really making and continuing to make a big difference in all of our lives. I'd like to thank you, Alex Cannara and Ripudamon Malhorta, for being with me and giving me this opportunity to speak with you a little bit on this very important subject. Thank you, gentlemen, very much. And to all of you out there, thank you so much for watching this edition of the Killen Report. And again, many people behind the scenes that are so helpful and give so much to us. We thank them very much for being part of our family. I'm Jonathan Kleid, owner of the Kleid Design Group in Oakland, California. Have a good day.